Welcome, Dave Hersh, to On Influence and Impact. I'm so grateful for you to be here.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
And for those who don't know you, a quick little intro. You are the founding CEO of Jive Software. You are the author of Reignition, and you're really an incredible leader that has transformed and scaled many companies at different stages of growth. And what I'm personally so excited about us diving into today is how this age of AI really demands both a new type of leadership and, in particular, a human centered culture. So, thanks for being here and thank you for sharing your wisdom.
Yeah, absolutely. Excited to get into it.
So, before we touch on kind of culture and AI, let's bring it back a bit. I'm curious if there are moments in your journey when things started shifting in terms of what it takes to be really successful at a company and how to build a successful company.
Yeah, there were a lot of steps, a lot of missteps, all the problems that you have as a young founder or CEO and trying to get your sea legs as a leader. And years later, as I replayed the script, I realized how much pain I caused, both in myself as well as the people around me, but also how much value was lost by nature of being insecure, of a lot of those egoic tendencies that we have as leaders, where we overly identify with the business, where we believe the business's success or failure is our own as a human. That causes us to make a lot of bad decisions that are often intended to make us look good to the outside world, but aren't in the best long-term interest of the business. As I replayed the tape, there were a lot of those that I had, and that's factored heavily into the work that I do now.
And is that just over time that you've learned that, or could you have operated differently in those moments, reflecting back on it?
Jive was a bootstrapped company, and we were a healthy, profitable business doing very well on its own. Took it a different direction and raised venture money and went up to sell to big enterprise customers because I was told that's the thing you're supposed to do. And that's going to look a lot more impressive and be bigger. And it really sacrificed the long-term vision of the company and the health of the business for short-term revenue. We pivoted and went to the enterprise, and eventually the company did go public, but I think there's a lot of valuable things that I learned in that process that I now try to give back to the founders and CEOs that I work with and that I coach, which is about how to show up more intuitively, how to really understand the soul of the business as well as the soul of yourself, and how those things can get the company on the right trajectory over the long term. And it's amazing. It really does play a big role into the ultimate valuation and result of these companies. And too often, founders and CEOs don't have a sense of the short-term versus long-term trade-offs. And it really becomes problematic. And so that's a lot of what I help CEOs and founders with now, is to show up as their most authentic, vulnerable, most intuitive leader, because that version of the leader is going to give them the best chance at that long-term destiny that they're aiming towards.
So I believe in everything that you just said because I'm also a coach and I've led before and I see it. Does that ethos contradict with business results at times, though? Or is that like a rub that you often experience with this perspective?
Yes, there are a lot of things at odds with it, which is you have a financial infrastructure, especially in the startup world. The venture capital ecosystem is one that is all about pattern recognition. Pattern recognition means we do the same playbook over and over again. And so it builds a very systemic way of thinking, which is we got to raise a seed round, then an A round, then a B round. And then every 18 months you raise more money. It creates a system whereby only 10% of the companies are successful. There's no other business where you get a 10% hit rate and it becomes a huge industry.
That's right.
Yeah. So I think there are challenges in that the press, the media, the venture capital ecosystem, the startup ecosystem, all talk about companies in this way. And they use the same rubric or framework through which to view the lens of successful companies. Are you an A round company? Are you a B round company? What that means is companies try to execute their way to earning the next funding round without realizing how much higher the hurdle they have to get over is by raising that funding round. So I'm not against venture capital per se, but I am against how big an industry it's become. And I'm against raising too much too early. And ultimately what I try to calibrate companies on is what's the ideal trajectory? What's the strategy for this business? What is the market allowing you to do, and help them see a different path that may not include raising funding in the way that they thought. but will give them a much higher likelihood at being successful.
And what I'm hearing in that is both successful from a company's perspective, but also as an individual's perspective too. Thriving
Yeah,
as
the
a human.
joy. Yeah. You just think about it, right? Like, is this somebody, it's usually founders and CEOs like myself. Again, we're identified with the success or failure of this business.
Yes.
And if we are giving ourselves only a 10% chance of being happy,
Yes.
I do think that there's a path where if they can say there's a 75% chance of success, maybe it's going to be leaner and lower growth rates, going to take a little bit longer, but we're going to enjoy it a lot more. And the likelihood of success goes way up. And so I got fascinated by this whole idea of where do joy and success collide?
Beautiful.
Because what I saw happening over and over again was entrepreneurs were either stressed, depressed if they didn't have a project, or trying to impress, right?
Yes.
And they're in these states. And it was like, this isn't working. Even the successful ones, they had a big outcome, and then they'd get depressed afterwards,
Yeah.
right? And again, that's only 10%. And then you get the ones that are still in it, or they fail and they were depressed or stressed. It was like, isn't there like a moment where we're happy? What's all this for? And those pockets of joy are ephemeral when you're an entrepreneur, right? I actually believe there's a path where joy and success support each other
Sure.
and raise each other. And I got obsessed with that. And that was a part of the first book and is definitely a part of this next book that I'm working on now.
So let's get into this topic a bit more. We're in this wild moment where AI is accelerating everything. And it's becoming increasingly challenging for founders to find their own competitive edge. And you've mentioned this idea that it's a moment where the best founders, the best leaders compete on Eros. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Yeah. And thank you for setting the stage with what's happening with AI, because I saw this happening a while ago, right? You could see the early stages of what was going to happen with AI, and not just AI, but cheap infrastructure. I go back 10, 15 years, you could build a software company that had unique competitive advantage by nature of the technology that you were building. And then you could invest more money in building out an infrastructure around you, which served as your moat, your competitive advantage. And that allowed you to maintain that advantage for a long time and scale the business. That's really going away, especially in areas like software, because AI can pretty soon write the code itself, and it's on top of cheap infrastructure and available services. So the mechanisms of competitive advantage that we used to rely on, like tech and IP and network effects, are all going away. And we're just not going to have the same type of company anymore. I looked at what about the last frontier of human focused moats? If we are no longer the means of production, how do we become the means of meaning and
Mm,
connection such that we develop companies that have sustainability? What does a highly successful unicorn in 10, 15 years look like? For me, it looked very different. Not to say technology as a competitive advantage goes away entirely, but it's really going to be a lot harder to hold on to it than it is today.
yeah.
What are the companies that are going to be held together and scaled based on human connection? And so Eros was really the essence of that. Eros is human desire, right? It was a god originally, the one that ultimately became Cupid. We turned it into a baby, but it was a very powerful
Yeah.
god originally, and all about this human desire, the thing that fuels us forward as people, right? In every element of our life. It's the gas in the tank. And so I wanted to both define what Eros was for these companies, but really look at every different angle of a business, everything from how the vision of the founders and the people who are leading the business to how it builds products from a place of deep empathy and understanding the
Mhm.
emotional landscape, to marketing and the messages that we're putting out into the world, to sales and how we have deep connections with the customers that we're serving and maintaining those over time, to hiring people, to doing performance reviews, to wealth distribution. I wanted to look at a business from every angle and go, how's it going to be different through the lens of Eros, through the lens of human connection? And what are the businesses that are going to attract the best people and really win the hearts and minds of the people that they're serving? Because if you don't have that, I don't think you're going to have much of a business in 10, 15, 20 years.
As all these startup advantages are starting to shift, What do leaders need to wake up to right now? What's their truth? Here's what you need to understand.
I think the asshole phase is over, and I hope it's okay to say that on your podcast.
Yeah.
People have for a long time said to me, "You're preaching all these ideas, but don't the assholes always win?" And I'm like, you could probably name them.
Yep.
People always name the same five. Those people were fueled by ego and surrounded themselves quickly because they benefited by huge balance sheets and success and growth, and everybody had to be a part of it to earn money. I think it's going to be a lot harder to hide those negative human tendencies in the
Mm.
future because you don't have the technology moat to get that huge advantage.
Mm.
If people are going to have a lot more choice and a lot more options, which they already do, and you have a generation of people for whom meaning matters a lot more. With Gen Z, my kids, they just don't believe in corporate anymore. And they
Yeah.
have so many options to do whatever they want to do. They're going to gravitate to the place where they feel aligns with their values at a very deep level, where it's producing something positive in the world and they feel like they are alive. This whole idea of everything's going to be done by AI and that's going to be the whole company. There's a very short lived period where you can create a company like that. So I think you're still going to need people. You're still going to need people to design the flows, to build the relationships, to do all the systems thinking and the creativity and the voice. You'll need them in very different ways, but you'll need the best people. And to attract the best people, you need to be a place where they feel alive.
I couldn't be more aligned with what you're saying. I'm really curious. So, how is this being received? And what are leaders still getting wrong about this idea of how to compete in this moment?
There's a whole range of people in different parts of the country and different industries that view this in different ways. I think everybody understands that businesses need to become more human. Like being out here in Silicon
California.
Valley and
Yeah.
the tech industry, you're seeing the first wave. A lot of the big companies, like what's happening at Alphabet and OpenAI, they're investing heavily in conscious work and conscious leadership and inner work, and it's
Mm.
paying out huge dividends.
Mm.
But what you're going to see in the next 5 to 10 years are these companies that invested in it, and it is directly contributing to the top and bottom line. So in the book,
Mm.
I'm going to showcase companies that are doing this work, that are the canary in the coal mine of where things are headed,
Yep.
from incorporating inner work and conscious work to
Mm.
dramatic results
Cool.
market with these companies. Because I think that is really important. Some companies it's going to take a long time. Some industries, it'll probably take a long time. But once the scoreboard starts showing the actual results, which has been hard to do historically and why it's been relegated to clandestine groups inside of companies and HR
Yeah.
departments, we're going to see a very different approach because it is directly aligned with
Mm.
profits and growth. And that's why I'm saying this is the new mode. It's human driven. It's no longer about nerds developing tech. It's about who are the people doing the deep work and making the connections that are in a symbiotic system with the
Mhm.
technology to create meaningful organizations that are going to be the ones driving the future.
How do we do it in practice? So, what does this idea of like human first moats actually look like for you?
There's the inside of the company and then there's reverberations outside.
Yep.
And so a lot of the work starts with the leaders. I help them identify those egoic tendencies that are getting in the way of them making the best decisions for the company and creating the right culture for the business. What I try to do is help people understand how not showing up as the best versions of ourselves is actually going to sacrifice the long-term health and your own happiness for short-term results.
What I hear what you're saying, it's like moving away from these reactive tendencies or reactive strategies that show up when we're under pressure or stress. And those reactive tendencies are all shaped from our past. So, to your point, we have to unpack and understand that in order to move from a reactive place that is often based out of fear to one in which is much more intentional, clear, and strategic based off of what we desire and what we want and who we want to be in this chapter.
That recognition that these are old patterns, they're old programs that are running
Yep.
helps a lot because what it does is depersonalize it. It's saying it's not you, it's just something that got developed. It was an old strategy that maybe you as a kid or a teenager were doing and it worked back then. It's still in there and it's subconscious and you're not seeing it.
Mm.
Then we can get onto the other areas. And the product is a big one. I talk a lot about as opposed to just product market fit, it's emotional market fit, looking at the emotional landscape. I think for a lot of companies, we look at the market landscape and where are their products
Mhm.
already. But what I try to do is help them overlay at the emotional landscape. Because what you
Yep.
wouldn't see are how frustrated are companies with these other products? What are they really trying to achieve in life? What makes them feel really good? And where are the other products running short their ability to live up to that promise? And looking at the emotional landscape and going much deeper with, I mean, almost anthropologist hat to go deep into, what customers are really feeling when they use these products and how to use that as the basis to reimagine products in this era. And I think that's really important. We don't just look at existing products and existing markets as the basis for designing new products, but we look at what are we doing for people and how are we making them feel better in what it is they're trying to do.
What does that make
Uh,
possible, that new way of thinking or approach?
it is a whole new design process that can be very values driven, very emotion driven, and it gets us out of a pattern recognition of how we build products. We do customer discovery. You ask these questions, you get to these, and then we get this checkbox of feature. I think when you overlay it with the emotional landscape, what you're doing is reimagining from a very different place that is much more deeply connected, right? When somebody's really listening to you and you form a deep emotional bond, that feels very different.
Memorable.
Imagine a product doing that,
Mm.
right? Did it meet your pain point? Did it solve the need? Did we check the
Check,
box?
check.
But this is a product that makes me feel really good. I care about it and I care about this company, right? It's the equivalent of that conversation I think we can have with the offerings that we're creating in the world. But it takes a very special group of people right now because we don't have a lot of the skills, just like not all of us have the skills to be in that
Sure.
type of connected conversation. Companies don't have a lot of those skills to design products from an emotional standpoint. And I'm trying to
Mhm.
shine a light on what that looks like.
Beautiful. So I'm hearing there's one part of this in practice is doing the inner work as a leader and almost like tops down in terms of how you lead and show up. Another part is in the creation of the product. Where else is it showing up in companies, just to name it?
Yeah. I talked to a
Mm.
startup that's all about conscious work and people who really want to do great things in the world. And their whole company is doing these sessions together about connection. And for them, it means there's no sacred cows at all anymore. They can have
Mm.
any hard conversation. They can shine a light on the emotions and they can talk through really hard things. And they pivoted into a
Mm.
different direction that in the past they wouldn't have because people were holding on to this is my idea and this is the way we do things. Once you actually are
Mhm.
okay letting the emotions out and coming through, you can have any conversation that you need to have. And they went in a different direction. And that different direction is the company is going
Mm.
gangbusters. It's going crazy, but they would never have done it had they not invested deeply in the toolkit for everybody
Yeah.
to show up as their best selves. They're earning their black belts in human connection. And that opens
Yep.
up just maneuverability for a company that is no longer bound by people holding on to old ways of doing things, which sounds
Yep.
simple, but is massively transformation. It takes a lot of investment to do it well. But if you do, it will change the kind of lubrication for the company and how it can move through the world and do the right things for customers and
Mm.
therefore for the long-term health of the business.
What are some of those tools that you mentioned that you feel are most critical for leaders to have?
I take them through a form of parts work so they can understand the parts that are showing up. I do like CBT, where they can understand like
Mm.
automatic negative thinking and how to rewire that so that they can show up as their best. So there's specific therapeutic modalities that they can use.
Yep.
There are a lot of programs out there that help with what I would call emotional fluidity. What I've learned through this period is that prolonged suffering comes from emotional resistance. And for
Yep.
a lot of people, it's emotions that hold them back and keeps them stuck in this eddy, right? Because they're too scared to
Mm.
feel a certain emotion and that holds them in place. So I think a lot of the work is not letting your emotions loose on everybody in the workplace. You have a healthy relationship to move those emotions through, to give voice to them,
Uh,
to have hard conversations with people, to see somebody else's emotions, to be in connection with people, to be in connection with customers and buyers. And these are skills that take a long time to develop. But for any company that is investing in this, I think it becomes a really big differentiator. And what I saw happening at that startup I mentioned is that they have people banging down their door to work there
Mm. Mm.
because they have seen how different that is.
I see it
Yeah.
all the time with certain founders that I coach in which they invest in this way. And it's true. They're a magnet for talent.
Yeah. Imagine going into a business where you felt seen and loved and could do your best work. I think what happened to a lot of CEOs,
Mm.
they thought this work was creating snowflakes, right? Where it was like, everybody needs a trophy now and they all need to be seen and
Yeah.
all their feelings are valid. And it just slowed things down. That was like phase one, right?
Yeah.
Because we didn't know how to do it. We knew that there was something important to deal with, but we didn't know how to do it. It just seemed frustrating. Phase 2 and 3, when you really start investing in it, the once a weakness becomes a massive strength because now you have people that are firing all cylinders. They are fueled by their own eros. They are doing what they're meant to do in the world. They are feeling the mastery of what they're doing. They love coming to work every day. They care deeply about their team and don't want to let them down. So you have a level of accountability, trust, connection, and support that everybody wants to keep doing well by everybody else. You have to break through those early phases where it might be awkward, as with
Yep.
any inner work that people do. It's going to be hard at first, but if you can really invest in it, it's going to make a massive difference. And in 5-10 years from now, these
Yeah.
companies start to really show up on the radar as having invested in this. And now it's actually playing out in their advantage.
What are the unique differentiators that people can invest in that AI can't replace or that even AI sheds a greater spotlight on the need for in this moment?
If it's a founder, the company that is coming into existence now, then you do have a lot that you can do when founding a company to codify everything this company is about, why it exists and how it behaves. If you have a leader who says, this is going to be a source of massive differentiation for the long run, and I'm committed to that, that makes a big difference. If it's an existing organization saying, we believe this is the way of the future, and this is going to be how we want to commit to being there for each other and putting budget aside and managing to it, actually and having metrics in support of that. That would be tough, but over the course of a year or two, you will see a meaningful difference in the health of the culture as well as the top and bottom line.
Yeah, and to me, that requires naming it and stating it clearly, but then figuring out how to build that into your operating rhythms, right? Because when any kind of change management is always hard, but in particular one like this. So it's how does it start from the top and what are the different best practices that you then implement throughout the org to ensure that this lives and breathes and moves on its own?
I think at some point you have to have somebody responsible for it too. I talked to a woman recently who's a chief heart officer. And it's that idea, is everybody really at their best? And if not, what do we need to do to support them and to change things or to make it work? So if somebody is thinking about the human lifeblood of this organization and how it's supporting the destiny of the company, I think it can look very different. And so it does require just a lot of investment. It requires people who care deeply about this. And that's what I'm starting to see change. That there's enough people, especially in Silicon Valley, who are leaders of these companies and founders who are investing in this work and they're seeing the benefits of it. You're seeing this wave of people who are instilling their companies with this as a foundational belief. And we're going to start to see how those results stack up.
Going back to the AI disruption for a moment, one thing I've been noticing is there's so much discussion around the tools and the strategies for AI adoption. Yet very rarely is there broader discussion around the culture change required to thrive in this new era. To me, a key part of that is the fact that companies have to be adaptable. They have to be resilient. They have to be in a state of always learning. I think that really shifts communication channels, how conversations are had. It really shifts things on its head. It feels like this fits well with the model that you're describing around Eros. Does that resonate with you?
It's very much, yeah. They're going to be doing our jobs. Right? And for a long time, I think humans were the processors inside the computer of commerce. We were doing spreadsheets and putting them into context and emailing them around. And we were just acting like computer processors. Computers are much better at it than we are. And now we're finally getting to the point where they can take over those jobs. And we just sit back and sip our coffee and watch them go at it. They're much better. It means that humans are going to be forced to do the deep work, right? To do the creative connection work, the things that humans are meant to do.
Mm,
You'll probably require fewer humans, but the right humans doing the right things are going to be the difference makers in which companies
I
are
think
going to win
so.
and which ones aren't, right? So what's going to be glue? What's
Mm,
going to hold people inside your company working for it, who in turn hold the buyers in place? It's the human side, right? That's the eros. People just want to feel alive. They don't want to be a cog in the machinery of capitalism. That's not our goal. That's not why we're on this planet. People want to be alive. And so what makes them feel alive? And follow that thread, and you'll start to see what appear to be very different types of companies in the future.
So pretend I'm your CEO founder. How do I do this? I'm a Series A founder. I've got crazy aggressive goals in front of me. I'm on track for my Series B. Where do I begin in implementing this idea? Where do I even start?
I usually do a 360, some form of three, so I can get
Hmm.
a good baseline for how they're showing up. And then based on that, we'll work around those challenges that they have. And that will also extend to programs that are structured programs that are great for this kind of thing and great for leaders. And they extend to therapy, books they read. But a lot of it is just getting
Hmm.
reps, as in do this over and over again. It'll start to feel more natural. For a lot of stuff you were talking about when you're showing up consciously, you have to rewire old patterns. That's not an intellectual exercise, it's an emotional one. So they have to do that work yourself so that you can show up as a better expression of who you really are for your people. And that's going to be what creates the bright environment for the company to scale and grow. A Series B, an enlightened leader will go in and go into the board and go, you know what? I'm not going to raise a B. And I don't care what you guys say. It is not the right thing for the business. And here's why. An unenlightened leader who hasn't worked through the emotional stuff is going to come into that same meeting and go, yeah, I guess we should raise the
I'll
B.
do
I need
one.
to do to get that in place. Let's just go
Mm.
do that thing. That's what I'm supposed to do. And then it's going to make me good. Then you'll love me. That's what they're really saying. Right. So an enlightened leader is going to do the right thing for the business, regardless of what the outside world is telling them. They're no longer seeking validation from
Nation.
outsiders. They validate themselves from within, and they're going to do the right thing for their team and for the business and for their customers over the long run. And that's really important. There's very few young CEOs and founders who understand that.
It requires an inner knowing, an inner belief in oneself to act from values, intentions, and that level of clarity.
Yeah, it is. It takes a lot of work. Imagine if you are no longer afraid of emotions, but you can let them come through. You can do
Then
anything.
it's another data point that is incredibly insightful for where you need to go and where you need to move.
A leader who can show up that way is brave enough to take on the emotional work of working through old patterns and old trauma and all of these ways that they're showing up negatively, is going to have a 10x higher likelihood of building something that matters in the long run.
So I always ask folks this question as we get towards the end. What's one or two best practices? If you do nothing else, here's other than the therapy and doing the inner work, what are one or two best practices that people can go and try on or implement?
Best practices for running companies right now.
In this moment of AI disruption, as you speak about with whether it be implementing Eros or more consciously, what are your go-tos that you just feel are really impactful or transformational?
Getting in touch with your motivations
Mm.
and understanding what's really driving me today, and is it the right fuel source? So to me, that's one of the things they can do that's really important. And then you're also in a place where you can do that for your team, right? You understand your own
Yes.
motivations, and it's much easier for you to channel the deeper motivations across your team and create an infrastructure in which anybody that's a part of this team can be more successful. To me, that's a really important one. I think there's a very few that actually do the 360. I come in and do that myself when I work with companies, either as exec chair or just as a coach, because they're not used to seeing that information. I'll bring it to them in a semi unvarnished way because it's really impactful. I have CEOs I worked with 10, 15 years ago that still ping me occasionally and go, remember that's 360? I'm so
Yeah.
much better at this now. So that's a simple best practice that has been around for a long time, but not a lot of people do it, especially in the startup world.
And all that you're describing is really just deepening your own self awareness, both for yourself and how others are experiencing your leadership. That is so transformative in leading in a way that really mobilizes, motivates, and gets the most out of people.
Yeah, exactly. We've been talking about this stuff for a long time, but it's been given short shrift for the sake of top or bottom line. What I'm saying is that's about to change.
What's next for your influence and impact this year?
So working on this book, I have a newsletter that called 1 in 10,000, taken from a line from Hamlet. And that's all about human-led competitive advantage. So if anybody's interested in building out moats for the future, I write on that, and that's available at davehersh.com,
Great.
HERSH. And continuing to see how all of this work takes shape for me. More speaking and writing. That's really fun for me. Also doing the coaching work and getting to work with great people like you and be in rooms with people I love working with and just keep doing it.
Awesome. I deeply believe in this work that you're doing, and it's just been a pleasure to hear your wisdom and share it with the crew. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks so much for having me here. Really appreciate it.
Awesome.